Hi friends, and welcome to another reading wrap-up. This time we're going over everything I read in the month of March, and I am so happy to report that I am out of my reading rut. So while I only read like 6 books in February, we were just trucking along. Almost every day I had a book in my hand, and I actually read 9 books this month. 4 of them are rereads, but you know what? They still count. I read it from cover to cover, which is something I am definitely happy about. The first book that I actually reread was Much Ado by Nada by Uzma Jalaluddin. So this was a Tifa book club read for me. It actually was the book for last month, and it is included in my reading wrap up from February, but I actually revisited it pretty early on in the month. I think it's actually one of the first books that I read, in large part because I felt as if I didn't really absorb what the book was or anything to do with it, and it needed justice. And having reread it, I actually read it right before I had to go to do that book club meeting, and I loved it. Nada is such a nuanced character. I loved diving into who she was and just learning more about her background and her mindset. I loved seeing the growth in this story. So it is a romance, and she does kind of enter into a relationship with someone who she had a previous relationship with, who was very secret. So it's told in past and present timelines throughout the entire book. But at its core, I think this book is actually a book about family more than anything else. Nada grows, her parents grow, you see her siblings kind of coming into their own a little bit through it as well. It's just a really beautiful story, and I love that it's also set in my city. After that, I dived into First Lie Wins by Ashley Elston, which was my community book club pick. And for this month, we were reading a thriller, which is something that I've always enjoyed, but I haven't really picked up thrillers in the past few years. So it was really nice to kind of dive back into them and see kind of what's new out there. I ended up really loving this book. It hooked me from like page 1. And essentially it's just the story of this girl, Evie, that's not actually her real name. She's secretly like playing this like identity, and she works for this mysterious person, Mr. Smith. She learns everything there is to know about who her mark is when she goes into these different towns and with this new identity, and she just kind of goes from there. There is a twist in here which I loved, but I also didn't really love at the same time, in large part just because I felt as if it needed to be someone else. So it makes sense who it is, but at the same time, there was another character where I was like, the impact of if it's this character instead would be really good. But all in all, I really loved it. It is a Reese's book club pick, so I'm secretly hoping that it's going to be turned into a TV show or like a limited series movie, because I think it will be so good on screen. And yeah, I just need to read more thrillers is kind of what I learned from there. And I know I said earlier that the first book that I read of the month was Much Ado by Nada, but I'm actually realizing that it was actually one of the Windy City books. So this is the series that helped pull me out of my reading slump. If you watch my February video, I was talking a lot about how I read some books that were just like not great. And it just made it so hard for me to feel like I could continue reading or want to read. And I just needed to like get out of that slump. So usually when that happens, there's a couple of things that I do. I either watch TV, so a TV show that I either know and love and I can know every single episode and what happens, and I will do that, or I reread a book that I know and love. So For me, this time I opted for the Windy City series. I actually decided that I was going to read Mile High, and a large part what kind of drew me to rereading this series is just because I know that the fourth book in the series, Play Along, is coming out shortly in the next few months, and it's actually one of the books I'm looking forward to reading in spring. And I decided to read Mile High because I actually couldn't really remember the story. Mile High and The Right Move, I read it once and it just kind of moved on to the next. And Caught Up, I was really excited about. I fully read the book. I think I read it like once or twice, went back a couple times to it. But Right Move and Mile High, I barely retouched. So I figured I would dive in and see what's going on with these. Mile High follows Stevie and Xander. Xander is a professional hockey player, and Stevie is a flight attendant on the team plane. She has just moved to Chicago and is living with her brother, who she's keeping secret from everyone who pretty much knows her is actually a professional basketball player. So Stevie is flying here, there, and everywhere with the team plane. There's a no non-fraternization rule, and Xander's is kind of obsessed with her and doing everything he can to get her attention and get her to look his way and go out with him. Eventually she caves, they start dating. They're still keeping it a secret from everyone on the plane, that they are in fact dating, and stuff just kind of happens from there. And of course they have a happily ever after. It is a romance. What can you expect? But I did find it really fun. I do think it's interesting to see how Stevie slowly comes into her own and how she really kind of just acknowledges that, yeah, some people have used her in the past because of who her brother is, but others, people who really care about her, won't necessarily do that to her. That's not something that your true friends do. And I especially love how she discovers who her true friends are along the way as well. I did also think it was really great how Xander's, he has this kind of gesture that he does, but he points out that it's actually not really for her. He did it purely for himself, which is great. And then the second book in the series is The Right Move, which follows Ryan and Indy. So Ryan is Stevie's sister and Indy is her flight attendant co-worker. And when Indy has some stuff happen in her personal life, she ends up moving into Ryan's apartment. So there is a little bit of forced proximity there. There's a little bit of fake dating as well. And the whole thing is just very swoony. It really highlights quiet love from start to finish. So as much as Ryan doesn't necessarily pretends he does not want Indy to be there and is unsure about her being in his space, he does a lot of things that are just very kind and very thoughtful for her. And even when they are dating, he's still very kind and thoughtful towards her. So something as simple as realizing that she likes her coffee iced and making coffee in the morning and putting, before he leaves to go to practice, and putting it in the fridge for her to cool down so it doesn't get watered down with ice, is just so sweet kind of the entire time. Or he secretly learned sign language. So Ryan is a good one. And then after that, the final book is Caught Up, or I should say book 3, because book 4 is coming out soon. But book 3 is Caught Up, following Kai and Miller. It's probably my favorite in the series, and it is centered around baseball. I loved them so much. I won't go too in depth about what happens because I did mention this in a previous video when I first read it last year. But essentially, Kai is a single father who is trying to juggle carrying his child around the country and his demands as a baseball player. He's a pitcher, if I remember correctly. And Miller is the coach's daughter who is just visiting for the summer because she's a bit burnt out from her career as a chef, or as a pastry chef. So she stays with the team. She opts to be the nanny for Kai for the summer, and the two of them eventually fall in love. Miller helps Kai have fun and relax and get back to who he was before, while Kai allows Miller to rediscover her love of baking outside of a Michelin star rated kitchen. And the entire thing from start to finish is just really, really enjoyable. And yeah, it's still my favorite book. I can't do it justice just describing it. It's just, you have to read it yourself. It is actually so fun and so cute. Overall, the entire Windy City series is probably one of my favorites. It is nice how it is set in a city, so Chicago, where there are multiple sports teams playing. So you have hockey, baseball, and basketball teams all there. Some of them share arena. The hockey and basketball teams share an arena. So you do get a lot of kind of crossover with the characters without them all playing like one sport. I think I've mentioned this before, sport romances are easily one of my favorites, which is why you're going to see a lot of them in this video. I also read The Night Shift by Annie Crown. This was a book I read because of TikTok, which we will talk more about that, but it essentially is about a bookworm and a basketball player who are supposed to meet their match. Kendall is this girl who spends all her Friday nights working in the school library, reading spicy romance novels, and then Vincent Knight is the captain of the basketball team who shows up at the library with an injured wrist and is looking for a recommendation about a poetry book that he needs to read. He ends up falling. They claim this is a slow burn. This is like instant love. Like within the first 15 pages, they're like, I love you. And then they start talking about how they want to get married and they're talking about the future. I did really enjoy the fact that Kendall loves romance books, so her inner monologue is a lot about like book tropes and kind of like what's going on. But that did get a bit annoying when she'd point out that this is the like blank trope, and after you read it, or she would really highlight that miscommunication was the worst. But Kendall and Vincent would miscommunicate every 10 pages, which was actually so irritating. I don't know, it was cute and fluffy, but I don't think I really learned anything about the characters. And quite honestly, as I was prepping to talk about this book, I actually had to go back and reread the synopsis so I could actually remember kind of what happened in this book. Like, I really needed to refresh my memory on this book, which 2 stars. So, kind of tells you everything you need to know there. I also read Center Ice by Julia Connors. So I'd previously read a Julia Connors book. I honestly can't even remember the name of it, but I do know I enjoyed it. And some of those characters actually show up in this book, which is kind of nice. It was a different series, but some of the characters show up. And Center Ice essentially follows Drew, who is this hockey player who was traded to Boston. It's where his family lives. His mom has diminishing health, and he is determined that he needs to be there for her, so he can't get traded to another team. Aubrey is a single mom since college who's running an architect agency with her sister that only hires females, and honestly, this agency sounds great. And she also has a 5-year-old son named Graham, who is cute and loves birds. And Drew runs into Aubrey and discovers that they actually had a child together in college. And he proceeds to pursue her and the child because he's like, I need to be in my child's life. This was a perfectly middle of the road read for me. It's slightly forgettable, to be honest, and I found that sometimes the kid was an afterthought in this whole story. So he's trying to do as much as he can to prove that he's worthy of being in this child's life, and Aubrey eventually is like, yes, you are. But the reality is he's not actually, in real life, he's actually not doing anything. He builds a treehouse for the kid in his backyard, and he shows up at her house and sends her food, but it's he actually never really spends time getting to know this child. He's more pursuing his mom the entire time. And I read Consider Me by Becca Mack. And I want to question why everyone who recommended this book to me, why they hate me. Because this was not good, and I hated every minute of it. So it was a 2-star read for me. It took me 7 days to read this book, which is a lot because I usually can read a romance book in 2. And I just found this painfully long. Like, it's 700 pages. I know nothing really about these characters. Like, Olivia's personality is that she is short and she likes bacon. Because the amount of times that they mention this girl being short and that she liked bacon is like every other page. I found that Carter, so our male main character, is rude and extremely disrespectful towards women. He's a walking red flag. I did not get any like romance vibes from him. He just completely bulldozes through consent and acts as if like if he asks her out enough, that's going to be fine, which is not how the real world works. And this is how women end up in very dangerous situations because men don't want to take no. And I just found that the characters were a bit immature. Like, his mother is immature as well. She bounces around on her butt at one point in the room, sitting cross-legged. Like, who does that? The furnace is a plot point at one point. And also, Olivia is... She's a high school teacher because one of her students is turning 18 in the middle of the school year, and she's having a conversation with him about, well, he is telling her about how he's turning 18 soon, so it's fair game, I'm now an adult, and she just kind of laughs along with it and is like, oh, well, you're not really my type. And it's like, no, it's not that he's not your type, like, it's just he's a child. And I think because it's never really shut down, and she kind of goes along with it, and it's a plot point that comes up a couple times, these students hitting on her and her kind of joking and being the fun teacher. And as someone who's worked with children in the vulnerable sector, I was like, oh my God, this teacher is horrible. So yeah, I questioned at one point actually if this was a fan fiction that managed to get traditionally published, and I did not get an answer on that. So if you know, please let me know. But it did bring up the bigger question of, do I finish reading the series to see where this train wreck goes? And also, maybe I need to stop seeing books that are recommended on TikTok and reading them, because 9 times out of 10, they are not my cup of tea. So, I don't know. We'll see where we go with that and how that plays out. You guys might get a video all about all the books on TikTok that I've read. But that was me and Consider Me by Becka Mack. I also read Lingus by Mariana Zapata. So she wrote The Wall of Winnipeg and Me, which I absolutely loved. And I decided I was going to try and read a lot of her backlist because I do hear a lot of people recommend her books. Lingus was not the book for me. I can acknowledge that. It essentially is about this 25-year-old cat who, she's an elementary school teacher. She does a whole bunch of things, and her big bad secret is that she loves porn, and she is dragged to a porn convention by her best friend where she is both embarrassed and nervous, but everything's okay, and she ends up meeting this very hot guy named Robbie, who she later discovers is also a porn star. I was actually shocked this book got 3 stars for me using the Cawpile system, because I genuinely thought it would be a 2. So it is a slow burn. It is a thick book. It was good in terms of like the writing, but in terms of the content, I found that it lacked a little bit for me. The main thing is, this is listed as a rom-com, and I did not laugh or smile even once. There is bathroom humor throughout, which is definitely not really my thing. So I think the parts that were supposed to be funny for me were just really not. And it has so much potential with the book being centered around the adult entertainment industry to be sex positive. And while this book claims to be, it really isn't. It could be partly the era that it was written in, so it is from 2012, but our main character does a lot of shaming of people's bodies, their age, their appearance, their clothing. She frequently describes women as whores, sluts, or just like bitches. Reading it, I was like, this is horrible. And it's also a bit concerning because she is quite vocal about not wanting people to be touching and idolizing Robbie because he's their famous porn star. But then there's a lot of contradiction in what she says and does and accepts from other people. So she doesn't want people doing this stuff to her boyfriend, but then when her friend openly goes up to and gropes one of Robbie's friends, she's like, oh my God, look at her go. She's so great. And it's like, why is it you don't want people to do that to you, but you are willing to do that for other people to do that to men? It goes both ways. Yeah, it was an okay read for me. It wasn't great for me. I'm still going to read the rest of Mariana Zapata's books. And like I said, I do think it very much could have been the time that the book was written. I do know, 12 years ago, things were a little bit more acceptable, and some of that like body shaming and that language, it wasn't right, but it was more prevalent. And I do think sometimes there could be a bigger conversation about when you're reading people's backlists and just older books in general, acknowledging the fact that there will be themes and things that are said in some of these books that are not necessarily okay now. And I think we do need to give authors and books grace for that and acknowledge the fact that, at the time it was okay. And just because it's not okay now does not mean that the book is objectively bad. Which is why I kind of pushed through with Lingus. It's 2 stars, but yeah, definitely not the greatest Mariana Zapata book that I've ever read. The Scoring Secret by Ainsley was another kind of like just okay book for me. I found that the Playing Game book 1 was way better, and while I was excited to learn more about the characters in this one, it just kind of fell flat. So we follow Ty Connor and Kylie. Ty is introduced in the middle kind of book 1 when he gets transferred onto the team and onto the hockey team, and Kylie is the upstairs neighbor of our female main character in book 1. And it's slow burn, and it follows Ty, who comes off as this really privileged jerk, and Kylie, who very much does not like Ty because she's refusing to date another kind of big personality famous person. And she has this online sexting buddy who she can't meet in person because she doesn't want him to go on one more bad date, even though she knows this person lives in her city. And unbeknownst to her, it's actually Ty. They eventually figure out that they have been messaging each other secretly and having this kind of secret relationship. And they have to decide if they're going to have a secret summer fling and leave things very uncomplicated, or kind of how they're going to navigate this. It has You've Got Mail vibes, so it's definitely a fun read. I mean, it was still like a 3-star read for me. I just found that it was just kind of there. It was good. It was very much a take it or leave it. And like I said, I think the Playing Game has so much and is so entertaining, and the Scoring Secret was just there. It was middle of the road. After that, I read Family by Laurie Frankel, which was a Bad Bitch Book Club book of the month for the month of March. And everyone in the group, when this was announced, was talking about how good Laurie Frankel is as an author. She's very loved in that group. I personally had never read any of her books before, so I was really excited to dive into this one, especially since I was intrigued kind of by the story in general. And it essentially is about India Allwood, who is a actor. It tells her story from 16 onwards. She was this 16-year-old child who really wanted to become an actor, but she was a little bit awkward. She becomes a Broadway ingenue and then eventually turns into a TV superhero. And she is doing promo for her new movie, which is a prestige picture about adoption, but its spin is the same old tired story of tragedy. India is an adoptive mother in real life. She has 2 twin 10-year-olds who she adopted when they were 4, and she wants everyone to know that there's more to her family than pain and regret. So she does something that she knows she should not do, but she tells a journalist the truth, that the movie that she's promoting is actually bad. And soon, of course, immediately she's at the middle of of a media storm. People are mad at her for saying that it's great. People are advocating for her as well at the same time and kind of believing what she says. And her two children know that they need help, so they call family to come in and help her. But it gets really messy because India is not just an adoptive mother. She has also given up a child for adoption. So a big kind of push through this entire book is that not all stories of adoptions are stories of pain and regret. And, you know, India is quoted as saying, like, why don't we ever get that movie? I did think that this book was good. It does highlight a very special family, and it questions what makes a family and even what is family. And obviously you guys can't see me, but I'm using a lot of like quotations here around family because it does really highlight that family isn't necessarily a father, a mother, and a child. There's a number of combinations possible, and no specific combo makes a family better or worse. So we see adoption through a very different viewpoint, and this is not the story of kind of like adoption. It's not the story, it is a story of adoption, and it is a different lens on it. And I think that's really important to acknowledge and understand because, you know, we do hear a lot like this is how adoption is supposed to go and this is what the story is. And I think that's kind of the point of the story. There is no adoption story. Everyone is unique and different, just like everyone's family is unique and different, and whatever that looks like. I do think a great chunk of the story is told in two timelines from the perspective of children, and it's very interesting to see timeline and what happened through very innocent eyes, but it's also a very filtered point of view. I also really enjoyed the character of Fig. And, you know, she kind of stumbles through saying big words and everything. And she's also a very mature 10-year-old, which we don't necessarily always see. She's not necessarily childish, but she's not necessarily a 10-year-old who is too old for her age. She still very much is 10. She's just a mature 10. And that's because she has some life experience that has forced her to become a little bit more mature. I did kind of like how the characters in the book, none of them are necessarily bad, which was a little bit annoying because there's not a negative character to offset all the good characters in this story. And I did find it dragged a little bit in the middle, but overall, I really enjoyed it. I listened to this on audiobook. It was really great to kind of hear. There's also a bonus interview between the author and the narrator, which is really enlightening, kind of like the writing process and everything else. So if you choose to read this book, I highly recommend the audiobook for it. And I also sat in on the Bad Bitch Book Club interview with the author, with Laurie Frankel, and I also really enjoyed that as well. I do want to say, though, that I also understand how this book could get some criticism because it is written by an adult who has an adoptive parent and does not include and is not the voice or the experience of an adoptee. I wish that we would get more books that were written from adoptees' standpoints, because as much as the author tries and we hear what Fig is saying and we hear what India is saying as a birth parent, we never really get an adult adoptee's perspective on adoption. And I think that's really key to point out, like specifically an adult's perspective on it, because the reality is that Fig is only 10 years old and her perception of the situation and everything is still very much going to be driven by what she is told by India and the adults in her life, and less so what she's actually able to determine herself. But all that to say, I definitely enjoyed the book. I do think it could kind of open up your eyes to another perspective on the adoption story. But I do think that if you are planning to read this book, that you look up the trigger warnings, as there are a couple of themes and plot points that could be triggering to the reader. Okay, and from there I just had some general housekeeping to do. So I updated my reading tracker with those 9 books that I read this month, which is super exciting for me, and I'm so happy that we got it done. I know there were some 2-star reads in there for me, but honestly, that's okay at this point. I'm just happy that I read 9 books. And then I just updated my A to Z's. So First Lie Win is going into the title spread, and then I am adding Consider Me by Becka Mack for authors. I have my book bingo. So the books from an author's book from an author's backlist is Lingus by Mariana Zapata. And then I debated putting something for a local author or Set Where You Live for Uzma Jalaluddin, but I opted to do Set Where You Live for Much Ado About Nada by Uzma Jalaluddin. And nothing was going on to our book bingo spread for this month. Quickly updated my backlist tracker and all those little ones. And then at the time of filming, I actually had not finished Family yet, but I will be adding in First Lie Wins as my top pick for March. And just updating my in-person book club for the month of April, we are reading Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. And then for May, we are reading Expiration Dates by Rebecca Serle. That was actually the book that I nominated for the month. We were looking for a beach read, and I was like, Expiration Dates, and I'm so happy it won. And then for April, the March Bad Bitch Book Club book is Anita de Monte Laughs Last, and I just added Lingus in there for the prompt. So that essentially is it. That is everything that I read in March of 2024. I hope you loved this slightly chaotic video. And let me know if I should actually do a video on all the books I've read because of TikTok, because as much as I get on here and say how bad a lot of them were, I actually have read some that were really good. So I could do kind of a mixed bag of the good, the bad, and the ugly. But until next time, I hope you're having a great day. I'll talk to you later.